Well, welcome everybody. We're here live on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. This is the Quiet Warrior Show. My name is Tom Dutta, and I am the host of the Quiet Warrior Show. I'm super excited today to have on my show a special guest. If you're watching the live stream, you'll see him sitting there patiently. And as I like to do, have some fun. I want to start us off here and tell everybody about how I met Christopher Russell. We are friends and fellow authors, and actually, I found his book, which we're going to talk a lot about, and I was blown away by it. And I gave it a high rating, and we became connected. There were threads in our stories, and we share a common friend beyond us, which is our publisher, Morgan James Publishing, out of New York. And this man, believe it or not, has a background. I'm going to tell you a bit more about him. He 28-year-old mechanical and aerospace engineer, and you might be saying, "What? Why are we talking about books?" And well, from the day he started reading, he picked up a book and scrawled his first few letters and decided he would love to be an author. He turned his dream and his profession, his education, his passions, even his Christian faith into building this epic fantasy series. We're going to talk more about that and maybe talk a bit about his dog. And so, welcome to the show, Christopher Russell.
It's my pleasure to be here, Tom. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, it's awesome to have you here. We were joking offline before we got here. I said, "Where are you at?" And you said something about, hang on, I wrote it down here, 18th century farmhouse. Tell us about that.
So this is the Hampstead Farm. So I'm sure everybody's experienced their own little hiccups with coronavirus. My personal one with my family is that I have moved back with them this year because I'm teaching virtually at my alma mater. You see, I'm wearing the UVA shirt. That's in Charlottesville, Northern Virginia, but we were in Williamsburg, Virginia. My parents had finally decided to build their dream house, but that got a little bit curtailed. It's been delayed by 3 months because of the coronavirus and getting materials from overseas, materials from within the US, all those different little problems and hijinks. But we ended up asking a friend of ours where if we could stay in their house, of course, pay them rent. And they own an 18th century farmhouse called the Hampstead Farm that it has been here for over 3 centuries, has a lot of storied history. It sits on a bluff, has this fantastic, huge magnolia tree in the front. Very idyllic, very picturesque. They often use it for weddings in the area, but it has a lot of history to it. Supposedly, George Washington stayed in this very room. I have some pictures and portraits covered up with my own merchandise and paraphernalia, so hopefully I don't get haunted by any ghosts. But there are pictures of the founding fathers all over the walls here. Old black and white sketches of the farm, of the progenitors for the family. And there's a lot of history here, including a few ghost stories that we might get to at some point.
It's pretty amazing. Well, I think we were saying that out in the hallway, everybody. Chris was saying that there's these images where, as you walk, the eyes follow you. And I'm thinking, like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we're gonna have a lot of fun. But talking to somebody like you, I want to say this, Christopher, as we get into your background, that uh, I'm very inspired, and there's no ego here. I'm inspired by you as a human being, the work you do, particularly at your age, mechanical and aerospace engineer. It's fascinating to me. We have some common threads in our background as we were talking offline. We'll get to that. But here's the thing, everybody, and I'm just going to dive right into it. This is part of the story that this amazing book is what this guy wrote, and it's a brilliant cover. It's called Divinity's Twilight Rebirth, and it's a fantasy series. Now, the very first thing that got my attention is I'm not a guy who reads these kind of books, but I grew up watching Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and things like that. I get lost in reading, and when I read your book, Christopher, I couldn't put it down. And what dawned on me was, how the heck do you get out of your head what the words that appear here? And I'm just going to read something off this before we give it back to you. It says, this is a back cover, a world consumed by war, an ancient evil resurrected, a millennia old bargain comes due. When two blades clash, the third would fall, and the fate of all will be jeopardized. To have Lozaria, the failures of the past must be atoned, for by a new generation of heroes, the time has come for mortals to cast off sight, and in doing so truly come to see. Victory is never absolute. Now I'm going like, okay, we all have a brain and we grow up with a story, and that came out of this guy who's an aerospace engineer. let's get into your backstory. Remember, you come on here and there's no ego. We check at the door, but this is built on the hero's journey narrative, as we've talked about, where somewhere in your life, things happen and you decided to take your story and turn it into something to impact the world, and it happened to be this. Go back to the beginning and tell us where it all started.
So there's a lot of places I could choose as a beginning for this book. I can talk about where I started wanting to be a writer, where I became a voracious reader, where my family experiences my upbringing. But I think that probably the core goes back to that I had very strong parents, that I had a warm, loving environment, that I always had support for whatever I wanted to do, whether it be my engineering, whether it be my writing, school, sports, music, all the different things that I've tried, that I've always had a that support system. And what that leads into, especially for telling a story, is that that is your ideal, that is your end goal, that there is something, especially when you write fiction, there is something broken in the world, that there is a problem, there is a what we like to call an inciting incident, whether it's a war. In this case, it's a conflict between three brothers that have differing views on what a peaceful world looks like and how they're going to achieve it. And the eldest brother believes that force is going to cause everybody to fall into line, that if you eliminate the red tape, the bureaucracy, if only one person is making decisions, the enlightened despot of Greek myth, of Aristotelian and Plato virtues, that the world is naturally going to move down a better path. And the middle brother believes compromise. If people achieve understanding, if they sit down at a table and they see things from opposing viewpoints and are able to come to an agreement, well, that's going to bring about peace. And the youngest brother believes that it is going to be innovation, that if people are so focused on creating the next great technology or the next great achievement or idea, that they're naturally not going to want to fight with each other, that it turns from a war of blades and arrows to healthy competition. So essentially economics rather than an actual fight, rather than actual war. And these differing visions are something that we can see a lot in our own world, that whether it be in the political sphere, the cultural sphere, the social sphere, that there are a lot of problems like this. And where that comes back to my upbringing, where I was brought up in the Christian church, in faith, in all these different moral values, justice, truth, virtue, a very centralized moral compass, as we would say. Well, there wasn't anything broken in that, so you have to break something to have a story, to have a conflict. And the idea is, how can we get from an idealized version of the world, how can we get from a broken version of the world to an idealized version of the world? And that's where I think the crux of any great story is. That's where the hero's journey emerges, that the hero either has something internally wrong or externally wrong, and the best stories are one where there is both, and that they have to overcome that internal flaw at the same time as solving an external problem. Odysseus and the Odyssey is the greatest example of that. Internally, that he has been shattered by the Trojan War, and that he wants to get back to his family, and he wants to do so without losing any more of his men. But of course, he ends up losing all of them. That's part of the tragedy as it goes along. And so with my own heroes, I start them off as very flawed individuals, that something has gone wrong in their upbringing, in their background, or in their worldview, and that they have to fix that. And often the fix is in each other, in coming together as a group and building on each other's strengths and weaknesses. What one individual or one character is great at might fill in a little block for another person that isn't. So you might have somebody that is arrogant but very brave, and you have somebody that is very timid and meek and humble, while at the same time being cowardly. And each of them can sees in the other that they want to be more like them, but the actual happy medium is somewhere in between. And that's one of the great things about fiction, is you get to explore these things in a grand adventure. If you look at Star Wars, well, what did Luke go through? What did Han go through? Leia's a little bit of a static character because she's always heroic. She started with the rebellion from the beginning, but everybody goes through growth. Even Vader goes through growth,
Yeah.
coming to care about his family again.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to jump in for a minute there, catch your breath. It's fascinating. I've been madly making notes here. For those who are on the video, you can see me tilting my head. A couple things, brain's going in so many journeys here. Let's talk about the thing you said about strengths and weaknesses. It's kind of funny because for a guy your age, you get so much wisdom. I so am inspired. I posted a blog the other day, and it said something like, a relationship are two flawed people. Uh, uh,
Mm-hmm.
Coming together, leveraging each other's strengths and never giving up on each other. And I teach using personality science, and it's exactly what you just said. There's strengths and there's limitations, I call it, in my
Mm-hmm.
personality. I have flaws. I married a woman who's opposite from me, my astonishing wife, Anna. We are so opposite. We're competitive, and, in the 25 years of being together, I've wondered some days, are we going to make it to the other side? But what's interesting, Christopher, is the days when I really look back at where I've flawed and I've fallen down, I've drawn strength from my wife. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was a teaching moment that you gave us about your developing your avatars and your characters. I got to tell you, man, when you said Star Wars, you lit me up because I believe you know what? I grew up watching Star Wars on a 10-story drive-in theater screen. And that was back then,
It must have been something.
Well, I'll
I
paint you
wish I could have that experience.
well, I'll paint you a picture because you're a tech engineer. My dad's F-350 truck. There we are driving into the uh, the drive-in theater with a green F-350 Ford truck. Now, I wondered for a long time why green until I went, duh, my dad was in the military as a commanding officer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this tin can you put on the window, and that's your sound. It's just tinny. And then, my dad's in the front drinking beer, and my brothers and I are in the back, banging on each other, beating each other up. And this was before the internet. This was before lasers or anything. And Lucas, his brain went way ahead to a world that today we even see the science is there. So I want to get us into back to your story. I'm fascinated by the fact that you said in your bio, combining your expertise from your education, passions, Christian faith into fantasy. Let me tell you that what I've learned about brain science is we're born into the world with neurons that are empty, and we wire thoughts and emotions together, and those create what I call neuronets or patterns of thinking. Well, dude, I'm looking at this book here, and I'm seeing words like "war on the plains of Harmuth," "Dart," Darmatus and Rabban Aurelian slew their elder. So tell me this: from what I know, with parents who were one was a military man, one was a teacher, and you came into this world with nothing. How do you, as a fantasy writer, come up with even the names? Tell us. You got to use your imagination, but how do you walk us through the way you think? It's
Well,
fascinating.
it's exactly what you said with the neurons, that I don't have that background or that subject matter expertise, but we are a sum of experiences. People like to say that you come into the world as a tabula rasa. I might be getting that wrong, but it's the idea that there is a Rosetta Stone of information that is going to fill you in, that is going to complete who you are, both in your conscious thoughts, your subconscious, your morality, your ethics, everything that comprises who you are as a person. And so for me, it's a sum of experiences. For example, the Sarkonian Empire in the world. Of course, I'm throwing out a big word there that I've made up, Sarkonia. They are very influenced by Germanic elements because I have a background in German. I lived in Germany for 3 years because of my father's military background, 2 different bases in Germany. I went through German immersion. I spent half a day learning in English and half a day learning in German. And so I've brought elements of those in. Then you have the Eliad, who are very elvish. That's very Tolkien. And so that is a synthesis of all the reading that I've done. I started with Brian Jacques and the Redwall series. Those are anthropomorphic animals that created civilizations. So there was a central abbey, Redwall Abbey, that was a safe haven for the people of the forest from the vermin who were the enemy. There were these great keeps, Salamandastron and the badgers and the hare that protected everyone. And they had these lavish, amazing feasts. So there's a lot there for a young kid to unpackage, a lot to enjoy. And that's the imagination. You start sucking it all in. Then there was Tolkien. Then there was Star Wars. Then there was the Sanderson, Tchaikovsky, all these different fantasy authors and sci-fi authors that I'm throwing out there. And it's like reading history. For
Yeah.
me, I was able to, I was very blessed by God when it came to this. When I was going through history and science, math, all the main four subjects in American studies in our base education system, well, I had to work a little bit on the math and sciences, but history and English, I basically just absorbed that I could read a history chapter and then just regurgitate it all into a test the next day. That I loved history, that I loved learning new things and storing it in my mind. And I did the same thing with all the stuff that I read for enjoyment. And so now that I'm writing my own creations, it's a matter of synthesizing it, going, do I think this sounds cool? Do I think this sounds interesting? Would this be a good name for a fantasy world? And one of the things you'll notice about fantasy in general, you won't see any Toms, as you are a Tom. You won't see any Matts, except for maybe Matt Coffin in the Wheel of Time. But mostly we choose names that are far out there that are going to stick in people's brains. Like you mentioned, Darmatus, Raban, Sarkon. Nobody's going to be named that in 21st century North America.
That's right.
And so it's coming up with these cool things that we think might have, that people might use it linguistically on a foreign world, but that are still going to resonate with an audience that has North American, Western, or even Eastern sensibilities. I'm working on an Asian fantasy novel right now that I hope will be enjoyable to people from different cultures.
Absolutely. So you're helping me understand. And I was going to say to you, you read my mind. Tell our lay people who don't understand what fantasy novels are. I mean, to be honest with you, I grew up with some of the novels that you mentioned that you liked. I didn't realize they were in that class of fantasy, but it makes a lot of sense to me. And so let's talk about this one. I read somewhere that it's going to be an epic fantasy series, and so this is the first book, Rebirth. What's coming up? Can you tease us?
So what you have here, so I've Rebirth is the first entry, and this is always a fun little story that I get to tell. Divinitys Twilight was originally intended to be a trilogy because you look at Tolkien. Tolkien didn't intend a trilogy, but his family split it into 3 books after his passing. That when it got published, it turned into 3 books. That actually might have been before his passing, but oftentimes you see great fantasy being trilogies. That mold has been broken in recent years. You have Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire, which is supposed to be 7 books. You have the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, which is supposed to be 10 books. That people are moving away from the standalone fantasy book and the trilogy to longer running epics. And so Divinity's Twilight was originally supposed to be a trilogy. However, the end of the first book, I still haven't reached. That is now scheduled to be at the end of the 3rd book. So that should give you an idea of how long this is going to be. I intend Divinity's Twilight to be a 10-book series in a 6-book sequence, followed by a good conclusion that's going to wrap up a lot of plot threads, but leave a few things dangling, and then a 4-book capstone that is going to occur after a time skip. And what I mean by time skip is that there is going to be a passage of time that is chronicled and is going to be referenced in that next series, but is not going to be directly shown in a novel.
Very interesting. So help me understand it. I don't think have you had any formal writing training or anything that, or did you just decide after reading and to start writing? I mean, it's amazing what
I don't have any formal training. My earliest writing where I did something fiction related, it goes back to elementary school, 3rd or 4th grade. I took part in a writing immersion program that they took a bunch of students that had written stories that they thought were really good, that these people could potentially become writers or authors. And this was over in Germany. And they took us all to another base, to another school, and there were a number of English and German authors that were there, and they helped us. They did little seminars, little discussions, talking about writing. I remember absolutely none of that. Maybe it wormed its way into my subconscious and has come back. But my first big memory related to writing something either on an amateur level or professional level was in high school. So I was very obsessed with Roman and Greek history at the time, the Mediterranean history. And I played a game called Rome Total War, which was you take control of one of the Roman factions, you deal with their politics, economy, warfare, all the different things to make Rome rise to the greatness that it achieved. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. What if we did a what if scenario. What if Julius Caesar didn't get killed by the Senate? And I turned that into a book. Julius Caesar survives. One of the factions of Rome, I gave them more power than they actually had, and they secede. So the Roman Empire essentially breaks into two about 500 years before it actually does in history. And there's a civil war. Caesar and his newly appointed Senate, he executes all the original senators that took part in the plot. They attempt to bring this wayward faction to heel. And I wrote it from the perspective of a centurion, a commander of 100 men in the army that goes to subjugate the rebel faction. And I wrote about 100 pages on that. That served as my honors project for graduation at the school that I was attending. And they had a professional author look at it, a professional editor go through. And I did a presentation on how the literature elements combine with the history elements. But ultimately, I dropped the project. And the reason that I did that was I was able to be creative with regards to the non-historical characters that I used and the plot to a certain degree, as long as I didn't do anything egregious that wouldn't eventually be corrected by the strands of history as we know it. But all the weapons, all the agricultural techniques, all the horses, the mythology, everything already existed. That there was very little I could do to change the world itself. And that's when I realized at the time it didn't dawn on me, but looking back, it should have, that I wanted to be a fantasy/sci-fi author because I wanted to take elements of the real world that I know and synthesize them into something that is foreign yet believable. And that is what we call world building in the fantasy sphere, that you get to create everything, not just your characters, not just your plot.
So it's all starting to come together in my mind. I don't know if you know, I'm saying this because you're humble. I don't know if you know how good you are, but people who are going to watch this, I want you to use this as a teaching moment that when you have humility, this is what it looks like. Since I've met you, you're not bragging about your, but I'll tell you, man, there's genius coming out of you in this conversation. I'm telling you that as an author, as somebody who's being told I do good work. But the fact that you told me that this book isn't finished until book 3, and the fact that you can already be ahead of yourself in your mind and map this out that way, there's already some things I've started seeing and hearing that your work could evolve, or maybe just being compared to some of the greats. Everybody, I don't think you've seen the last of this author, and again, it's Divinitys Twilight. So I want to get to another question that came to my mind, and that is, here we are, and we've discovered that what's really gone into creating this for you is memories and experiences that are wired into your unconscious mind. I've done a lot of work in there, as I told you, and it's full of billions of bits of data. But you seem to have this way of creating fantasy in a future world. When you write, does it just come out? How do you write? Do you physically sit down, put pen to paper or to a document on a computer, and start typing? Do you frame chapters? Just give us a couple minutes about how your brain actually works that way.
So when you start to break this down, these are other people much smarter, much brighter, much farther along in their careers than I am. And the one that I'll cite most is Brandon Sanderson. He's one of my writing idols, even though I only discovered his work about a year ago. Yeah. And he teaches a class at BYU. And so a lot of what I know about the craft comes from him. And I was doing all these things subconsciously before I understood what the terms and the labels that go along with them are. And you can basically break fiction writers down into two categories. You can break them down into discovery writers and architects. You could also call those pantsers, people that fly by the seat of their pants. And I think they call them gardeners. And so what you see with those two different terms is you see a lack of structure and very structured, which isn't to say that the discovery writers have no structure. It's just that you perform different parts of your process at different times. The architect or the outliner sits down and decides what all the major plot points and character journeys and everything that's going to make the book coherent is going to be beforehand. So they will come up with the 10 critical parts of the character's journey. They will come up with who's going to be their point of view characters that are going to tell the story. They'll come up with all their world building and everything beforehand, which leaves them a lot of leeway in writing the scenes themselves. They can focus on the language rather than the synthesis of what makes a book a book. Now, on the other hand, are discovery writers, which I am much closer to a discovery writer than I am to an outliner. I sit down at the computer and I start writing, and I think to myself, well, this would be a good little tidbit to include here. Let's go ahead and say that there are two moons here. And let's go ahead and because the two moons, we have to have them out of phase because otherwise we have tidal problems.
Right.
And everything starts spinning off from your world building elements. Say that you have, and this is using Brandon Sanderson, say that you have a caste system where people are distinguished by the color of their eyes rather than the color of their skin. Well, how does that affect all the socioeconomics and culture and everything off from that point? It's like a domino effect. You change one thing and you apply that. So there is almost a science to this in a way. You change one thing and you try to determine how everything else would be affected. For example, in Divinity's Twilight, I use a magical resource called Illyrium that enables us getting into the mechanical and the aerospace background with the airships, the mag tech, the things that allow them to have a quality of life approaching our own, either electrical energy, thermal energy, etc. And so this is a clean burning magical resource. Well, you don't have a ton of pollution. You don't have a lot of smog, a lot of smoke. The cities are very clean. The skylines are open. You're able to see for a great distance. And then you also go into, well, this Illyrium crystal gives off energy. It gives off energy to be collected. Well, that's a lot like a steam engine. A steam engine collects the steam being given off by boiling water and uses that to turn knobs, turn cranks, and create energy. So Illyrium fills in for steam. You change these things about technology, and then you're able to either jump tech levels or have things that are anachronistic, that are from differing eras. And so that's just a really cool part of the process. But anyway, as you see me rambling here, that's very much a discovery writer thing, where you get all the stuff about your technology, your world, your characters, your warfare, whatever it is, and you just regurgitate it onto the page rather than having notes all around you. Now, the Asian fantasy that I mentioned earlier, I do have notes for that. I am trying to write it more like an outliner. And so what I'll do is I'll get notes on my phone or in my notebook. I have a notebook where I write a bunch of ideas down, and I will take all the notes that I think belong in a chapter. I'll put it into a Word document, print it off, set it beside me, and I know these are all the cool ideas I had. And here are the major plot points I need to get to. And then I will farm out those ideas. And if there's too many ideas to pack into a chapter, well, something has to be let go. And that's where you start cutting things. But having that list is extremely helpful. It again, moves the work of being a discovery writer to the front end.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody, you're hearing here from one of the up and coming greats in the fantasy novel area. I want to just tell you that when I created my book, you said something that sent me on another journey, that I think a lot of that way, where I have all this noise in my head and I just dump it out. And I actually took a whiteboard and I just filled it up. I remember one day when I started writing my book saying I'm going to take this section of my life, which was from age 0 to 12. And man, that whiteboard in a matter of 20 minutes was full. There wasn't a space on it. And I remember when we went through the editing process, there was enough material left for 2 or 3 other books. And so I want to get to another point in discussing all this, because there's many people out there who wonder, can they write books? And what type of book? And do you have to be a genius? And my answer is no. My answer is that in your subconscious mind, as you've taught us, that there are millions of bits of data from the date you're born. It could be books you've read, movies you've watched, personal experiences. And so you have to find a way to get that out. And there's ways to do it even with the help of others. One of the things that I found from a lot of authors is they write through the themes of their books, stories that come from their own personal experiences. And you and I both know that the road to success, the road to greatness, isn't a straight line up. It's up and down, up and down. Even the road in life is, there's failure and then there's learning from failure into successes. So talk about your biggest challenge and how you overcome it. Something that maybe happened to you along the way that built a strength. What did you learn from it?
I think that the biggest challenge for me was coming to understand the publishing industry. When I wrote this book, and I took a while, I basically wrote, before I even approached Morgan James or anyone about publishing, I had already written two books. And the second book is currently in the revision stage. So it will be out shortly for anyone that's curious about that. But the when I got into publishing, I'll talk about my full experience. First, I looked at the big five, the big five publishing. You look at
Right.
Macmillan, you look at Penguin, you look at I'm going to miss a few of them here, but I'm primarily focused on Macmillan because Macmillan has a subsidiary called Tor. Tor is Tom Doherty and Associates, and they are considered to be the preeminent North American publisher of fantasy and science fiction. So I thought to myself, I finished this book. I am ready to go ahead and publish this. Let's get an editor. Let's get an agent. Let's get this off. And I looked at their submission requirements. Their submission requirements was stick a cover letter in about you as an author, write a 10-page summary of the entire plot of the book, then give us, I think it was either the first three chapters or 3,000 words, something along those lines, and stick it all in a manila envelope, send it to us, and then wait 6 months.
Right.
And I thought to myself, wow, at the end of that 6 months, I'm going to get yes or no. I might not even get any answer at all. This is super intimidating. Is this what I want to do? And I sort of shrunk in on myself. That was the moment of darkness closing in. I'm not going to say that was the moment of despair because there's so many people who have experienced worse moments of despair and far more hardship than that. And then God opened a door, as he often does, that the person building our new house, Barry Williams, was connected through church to a certain David Hancock, who is the publisher, the CEO of a very great firm in New York, as Thomas said, Morgan James Publishing. And so the next week, I sent my stuff off, my pitch letter to David, and we had lunch. And I gave him a binder. I gave also, I believe it was Bethany Marshall, one of his assistants who was getting ready to go up and run the New York office. I gave her a binder too. I was pretty prepared for this meeting. Even though I found out about Bethany only an hour before and I had to quickly print off another binder of information. But sat down at lunch, did my pitch, and they liked it. They wanted to produce Divinity's Twilight Rebirth. And so I because of how enthusiastic they were and their focus on me as an author, as a person, rather than a product, I decided to go with them, that I didn't pursue any other avenues. But there can be a lot of failure involved in that initial process. I'm sure that if I had sent that to Tor and it had ended up on what they call their slush pile, where they have to sift through anything, well, what if the person that picked it up didn't like the way I wrote the first paragraph? What if they didn't like the first page? Well, that's the end of it. That there are a lot of great books and a lot of great ideas that are going to be turned down just because it wasn't the right book for the person that picked it up. And that's why there's a lot of people to submit to. There's a lot of agents that you can go through, a lot of editors. But it's still a numbers game. It is refining your product over and over again, trying to achieve the best version of your book, just like you try to achieve the best version of yourself, and then get that to the person that it's going to jive with. And in this case, it was almost instantaneous that God blessed me and I found the person that it jived with. But it's a journey. So,
Yeah.
and I'd say that just coming to understand the publishing process was my moment of greatest weakness.
Well, thank you. I mean,
Mhm.
that's a lesson for anybody who wants to be an author. It's about finding the right partner. And I guess I can jump in here and relate to that because we have the same publisher. And one of the things I learned in my experience, Christopher, is that this particular publisher, they buy into us or you before
Mhm.
the work. In fact, when they received my manuscript, they said they bought into me as a human being before they even, went deep into the book. And one
Mhm.
of the things I think I want to use as a teaching moment is that many authors, and you get this because I see it in the book signings and the work you're doing, people buy into you, people follow you. So you have to come out into
Mhm.
the world as an authority on something. Why do we care about this guy? Why should we follow him? You have to be proud out loud about your work. And the authors like you who I see are going to be incredibly successful. Uh, they bring with them a worldview or a vision of something
Mhm.
they're doing to impact the future of the planet, or something that's going to go beyond them to serve others. So I want to go back to something that came to my mind when you were talking earlier. I was watching this interview of George Lucas, and I'm getting to a deeper point here that somewhere in the work we do in the hero's journey, they say it's somewhere in your life where something happens, and it's not something bad always. It could be something really good, where it sends you on a journey to seek and learn and discover what you're really here for. You come back, what they say, into the ordinary world from your journey, and you come back as a guide or a shaman, or in this case, an author who's educating and entertaining the world through his words. And they were doing this thing with Lucas, and the interviewer knew a lot about this. And he said, "Do you realize that when I watched the Star Wars trilogy or the episodes, he said that what I see you were really doing there is yearning to have your parents get back together again." And Lucas sort of just sat there, and he looked, and he went, "Oh my God!" And the audience just went hush. And he said, "Thank you for telling me that." He said, I didn't realize that, but you're right." And so we write our work with personal experiences that are weaved through it. So I'm going to ask you a question before we move to wrapping up, because this has been just amazing. We got to have you back. That when you're done with this world and all your work, and there's much more coming, uh, what will the world look like? And what is it in your own heart that made you decide to do this? And how are you serving others with it? I know it's a big question.
Well, about a dozen things ran through my mind when you were talking about themes, what we saw in ourselves or in the world that made us want to write the book. And I think that there's maybe three things that I could say to that. But the one that stands out above even those that are more specific is that I think that a story, any book, what you write with The Way of the Quiet Warrior, or what I wrote with Divinity's Twilight, it's a wish, that it is a desire to see some sort of outcome, some sort of change in the world, whether that be a change in a person or something that you come to understand on a deeper level within yourself. Divinity's Twilight is about heroes overcoming fantastic odds, impossible odds, about people rising to challenges, about overcoming their own internal struggles, their weakness, and even limitations that are not something to be overcome, whether it be a physical or a mental handicap, something that you're just going to have to live with. But it's that you can achieve greatness despite this. Mateo is an almost incurable coward, but people see strength in him, strength that inspires them, even in the depths of his cowardice, of him trying to shy away from being a protagonist, from shying away from accomplishing what he needs to do. And then you have Vallen, the opposite end of the spectrum, that is drowning in his own ego, in trying to sate with the pleasures of the flesh and with just sheer enjoyment, the pain and the trauma that he has in his background. And you have to be able to tell these people, it's okay that that happened. It's okay that you're deeply scarred, that this has occurred. And it's a part of you that you can embrace, that you can understand, but that you're going to grow beyond it, that you are going to achieve something great, that you can overcome these villains, even if these villains have goals and ambitions that are rooted in something meaningful, in some that they believe that from their warped worldview that they're correct. But you're going to overcome that. You're going to do something better. And I think that that's what I wanted to do, that I wanted to get a group of people, because I have a very large cast, especially when it comes to the protagonist, and all of them are slightly flawed, slightly broken, but that they can be healed and that they can heal each other. And through their journey, through healing each other, they can also heal the world. That there's something broken in the world that only they can fix because of their experiences, because of the pain that then the sorrow that they've experienced. And that's what the great part of a story is. The great part, especially of epic fantasy, I think, is that you're dealing with things that affect the fate of the world, but they're very ordinary people rising to the challenge, because we all need heroes, that we all need something to have faith in. We all need hope. And we all need to see that somebody, no matter what their circumstances is, can change, that they can become better.
Well, that's such a great answer, and it's so deep, and you got me going again, man. And every time you say something, it's like I gotta come back and say, look, everybody, come back and watch and listen to this part of the interview because that's classic. I mean, you nailed it, but it's classic, what we call hero's journey. But I want to say this, that in Star Wars, when Luke was afraid to go into that cave, he was afraid to discover who he really is, to discover who his father was. That maybe his father was the dark side, or was he the other side?
Mhm.
and and it's that fear of going down the rabbit hole that many of us have, of discovering truly who we are.
Mhm.
You know, I'm an advocate for mental health, and this is where my head started going. That as I had a slip and fall a couple of years ago, slipped into some mental health challenges, I took a course on neuroplasticity and how we can actually shape and remold the brain to think differently. I also discovered something that I tell people now, and they go, "Wow, I've never heard this." So I'll just say it, that the definition of anxiety, if it's a fraction, the top of it, the numerator, is the belief that bad things will happen. The
Mhm.
denominator is the belief that I can cope with bad things that will happen. And so when you can find an avatar in a novel like yours who's broken, who's overcoming every odds, who's going to battle, who's coming out the other side, who's surviving, even though they're broken, it's like if I'm reading your book, I'm escaping into this fantasy
Mhm.
world. I'm getting out of my head into this fantasy world, and I'm actually in the journey now, like I'm following Luke Skywalker, but this time I'm following
Mhm.
your characters, and I'm believing when I come out of that world that wow, I can do anything. And so,
And actually, I have to mention something here, that one of the most encouraging things for me as an author has been getting feedback from fans, from telling me how my work affected them. And somebody actually said that about Mateo. They said, "Thank you, Chris, for writing Mateo, that I was going through a tough time and I was able to see myself in Mateo, and that's helped me." And that's
that's right.
just so powerful that I'm getting chills thinking about it.
Well, I'm smiling because that's exactly it. When somebody can say that story is my story, it's brilliant. And the fact
Hmm.
that you can create like that. I want to tell you one last thing, that I live in the world of business people, executives who run companies, or entrepreneurs, and people see these people as high stress, high performing business leaders, but many of them are on a treadmill and they're dealing with
Hmm.
all the time stress. Believe it or not, there's a lot of these guys in quiet when I coach them that actually will watch Lord of the Rings, or they'll watch fantasy shows on TV, and they're like little kids. And what they're doing is they're
Hmm.
escaping. So I want to honor you, man, because you're creating a whole new world and a saga here that not only me, but the generations before us coming up will have, to nourish their brains, to escape from a world really down here that, sometimes is unbearable. So as we go to wrap up here, I want to honor you with a few words, and then I have a special surprise for you, and we'll give it back to you for the last word, Christopher. And the first one is that you are a hero, and a hero is somebody who does something. It can be small or big, but does something uh, to step into the unknown in an uncomfortable way and come out the other side. You decided to take your little propeller head, aerospace engineer, Christian faith brain, and go create and put it out in the world. Like all authors, risking that, well, maybe somebody might not like it.
Hmm.
Number two is you're a leader and a visionary. So you're creating a vision of a future world, but you're taking a leadership role by writing this book, by forging the next generation of fantasy writers. Number three is your love, man. I mean, it comes through you. There's this authentic side of you that I'm buying into you, and I believe what you're saying, and it just you have this way about you that I know your fans are going to connect to. And the last one, I would like to call you a trailblazer, and that is you're blazing a trail. I've been watching everybody what this man's been doing with his marketing of his book. COVID-19, he's doing bookstore signings. You're blazing the trail, and other authors are watching, because the truth is, what I know as a literary scout and an author myself, is that authors' books don't sell unless they market their books. And in COVID-19, you've been doing things unorthodox to get it out there. I'm just so proud of you and inspired. So now we're going to induct you into the Quiet Warrior Tribe. I don't know if I prepared you for this. Uh, if you see on the screen behind you there, Christopher, my screensaver, there's a guy, kind of looks like another guy I know. He's got a little more hair there. That is the award you're going to get. It comes in a cherry box, and it's actually a challenge coin, which you may have heard of. These were originated in World War I, where soldiers carried them to commit to each other, a community. I had a vision when I started this show a few years ago that we would give out 40 a year in a planet of 8 billion, only to people who are doing things authentically with some story they have to impact the world. And so on the front of it is the art of the show. On the back is actually the hero's journey crest, fully done. It's raised letters. It's handcrafted and painted in the U.S. So you're welcome to the tribe. You're now part of. These coins are being carried in 13 countries. My vision is to keep all of the warriors together, and by accepting it, you commit to never stopping doing what you're doing to change the world. So welcome to the Quiet Warrior Tribe.
Thank you so much, Tom. That's an honor. And I pledge to never stop doing what I'm doing. It is part of me. It's my passion.
And I'll hold you to it, or I'll kick your butt, man. Because we're lifelong friends. The second thing I want to do, which I haven't done before, but I have developed the next level of my platform, which is the QW list, and I've developed an iconic brand for it. We're launching it in 2021, and it's called the Quiet Warrior Top 100 Book List. On that list are books that I have read personally and I've reviewed. I've given you a 5-star review for this one, with people I think that show courage, but do it from a point of view of purpose, that have humility. And this is one of those books that you've taught me, but also what you're doing. So I'm going to officially tell you now that you are one of the first few books to be put on that list. My brand in that list is beginning to be known around the world. And I remember when I started as a CEO, people said, Tom, what are the books you read? And then when I was an employee, I would ask, my bosses would say, I'd like you to read this book. Well, I'll be putting 100 books on this list over a few years, and yours will be one of them. We'll have you back to do a special ceremony for it next year where you'll get a few minutes to talk about it. And then people will find out about your book as we launch the QW list globally. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm practically speechless. I know that that's strange considering I've rambled the entire time. That means a lot, and I hope that it means a lot to other people, that they get something from it, because that's the purpose of any book. It's a wish, like we said, a wish for people to change.
Absolutely. And, your generation is going to change the world. So it's an honor to have you on that. The last word will go to you, man. Tell us where to get a hold of your book and all your work.
So Tom's been showing his off. So this is the copy I carry around with me, Divinitys Twilight, Christopher Russell, the back cover. And you can find me on ChristopherRussellAuthor.com. I believe that it's been scrolling across the screen on the bottom. The other great places to reach me are on Facebook. I have the Divinitys Twilight Fantasy Novels group. I have on Instagram, Christopher_Russell_author. And then on Twitter, I am Chris_DT_author. All are great places to get in touch with me. I post regularly. And then also, if you go through my website, you'll find in the top and in the bottom places to get a subscription to my newsletter. There's lots of great information that goes out through that, as well as other authors, and I'm going to include Tom in this as well, whose books that I think that people need to check out, because definitely there is from the fantasy side, and then there's from the history, the biography, the real world side, where we meet in the middle, and that you can learn a lot from these two different perspectives.
Well, all right. There you have it, everybody. I want you to go to that website. That's ChristopherRussellAuthor.com. And let me tell you about what's going to happen here with this interview. This is being live streamed. We'll be producing it into an international podcast being released on a Tuesday in the future. And then at the same time that Thursday, we'll be doing a YouTube premiere so you can see live this man in action on video. And these will be treasures that you can use, Christopher, for your own purpose as well. So everybody, find this show on your favorite podcast channel, or certainly see the premiere on YouTube when it comes out. Give it a high rating so you can honor Christopher Russell's work. And live that life with passion like you see Christopher do. Live that life that you deserve and desire. Thank you, Christopher.
Have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you. Stand